What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with some Destiny 2 news and updates. So, as week 2 of the final shape and of course the launch of Echoes kicks off, Bungie have got a handful of updates regarding various bugs and issues in the game. There are also some fixes, including for the exotic Kvostov quest. There are some specific things to know there, but also some important patch changes this week which are worth keeping in mind. Then we'll talk about the new exotic mission, the one that drops the class items. That's been a bit of a divisive one, it's safe to say, but there's also an interesting secret mission as part of the Echoes content, and it could potentially result in an exotic mission further down the road. I'll explain what that means in a little bit. We do have some extra details on an upcoming exotic weapon in the season, and there are a few other things to round up today. So, as always guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, a rating really does help us out below, but now let's get into it. And so firstly, we should mention a few important patch notes from the update at reset. Firstly, for Crucible, Bungie say they fixed an issue in Collision where capturing a zone while at full super energy would slightly reduce super energy. And then in the Pale Heart, the skybox has now changed after the events of the Salvation's Edge raid being completed. However, it does require players to have completed the campaign to see that the sky has changed. They also fixed an issue where the moat counter status UI would sometimes not appear with the moat collection encounter in the impasse location, and one where certain elements of the liminality strike would not load upon entering the first area of the abscess. Additionally though, for campaign, they fixed an issue in lost sectors that would prevent combatants and objectives from spawning. They also fixed crashes that could occur in the final encounter, and some missing artwork on director dialogues. Then in Salvation's Edge, they fixed an issue where the carrier's stat tracker didn't properly increment, and an issue where strand triumphs added from previous raids had missing strings. Then for abilities, they fixed a problem where the knock 'em down aspect wasn't increasing the number of projectiles fired by Blade Barrage. Another where when the Blade Fury Super wasn't granting Woven Mail to nearby allies in PvP, and an issue where players weren't granted the Prismatic subclass if they missed a required cinematic. And for armor, they fixed a problem where players could bypass Lucky Pants cooldown by unequipping and re-equipping it. Another issue where an incorrect description of the arm's reach armor mod was present. Then for weapons, they fixed one where the non-denouement bow had the wrong damage profile, an issue where Magnificent Howl could be active for an extended duration, and they fixed an issue where the cost of purchasing the legendary version of Kvostov from collections was lower than intended. On top of that though, in relation to the exotic Kvostov, Bungie have said Overthrow's Taken Servitor boss has been re-enabled, and players who previously had their motes of light removed after defeating the boss will need to go to orbit for the exotic mode to appear in their consumables, and they say that issue will no longer occur for players who defeat the boss. But they do add they are continuing to investigate a solution for blocked players who are missing encryption bits due to having a full inventory. But otherwise, for most players, the vast majority of folks who've been blocked from getting Kvostov up until now, that issue will be fixed. They do add though that due to the fix, the exotic mote won't appear to drop on screen and will just appear in the inventory, and one free space must be available for the mote to appear. Otherwise, we can now go ahead and get Kvostov. Next up though, let's talk a little bit more about some of the final shape content. This week, the Pale Heart has seen those skybox updates. Interestingly, the Excision mission can also be launched from a bunch of different locations on the Pale Heart. Then of course, we've got the exotic quest for the class items. I've personally had a whole bunch of fun with this exotic quest and the mission, and from the perspective of someone who has other players to actually jump in with, right, and doesn't mind that sort of challenging and timed content necessarily, I think it's one of the most fun exotic missions that we've ever had. However, there's also a lot of frustration in the community at the moment, especially among solo players, right? Because you cannot solo this new exotic mission, you have to have 2 players. So somewhat understandably, there's a lot of frustration around that. I think as well, given that this is such a major exotic pursuit for the expansion, there's been a lot of sort of hype and anticipation for the exotic class items, only for solo players to find that they are indeed gonna have to find a second player to actually jump in and complete it. So I can relate to that frustration, to be fair. We're gonna talk about that in a little more depth in a separate video today, but give us your thoughts about it down below. What I will say though, is that once the exotic class item is actually unlocked, I'm assuming this is per character, but when I got the Titan exotic class item, following that, it actually shows up on the Ghost with a prompt to say that we can get random drops of it as very rare drops from Pale Heart chests. So if you're worried about having to repeatedly farm that exotic mission, technically there is another route to being able to reacquire the class items with more perks. So that in itself is good, but give us your thoughts about the exotic mission down below and we'll speak about it in more depth. Additionally this week though, we've had the launch of Echoes, which is Destiny 2's first episode, so there's some new content on Nessus, and we're questing once again with Fail failsafe, so that's pretty fun. But interestingly, there is actually a secret sort of mission that pops up. Players discovered this in the cistern on Nessus. And so when you actually spawn into cistern, there's this sort of conflux down here, and we can obtain a decoder protocol. And then in a couple of different locations in cistern, we can find these sort of pink or purple glowing holograms or figures, and they actually give us sort of tips for different areas that we can search. Ultimately though, it tells us to head to the Tangle, where we'll find yet another of these sort of confluxes where we can get the decoder, and it essentially tells us to make our way down into the Well of Echoes. We need to fight through a bunch of Vex down here, and ultimately, it actually leads us to a hidden mission called Enigma Protocol, quite similar to the Vexcalibur mission in a way. So we're back in the Vex network, it is a timed mission, but ultimately if we can get all the way through, we get to a boss encounter, and if we can complete that, it will actually allow us to complete the mission, which does drop double perk weapons from this season, so it's a good way to get the reprised Season of Dawn weapons. I actually picked up a couple on one of the runs. So it's sort of a loot farm activity, but one of the interesting components about this is that it would appear we are getting some kind of an exotic mission as part of Echoes. And I've got a feeling that this particular mission could potentially develop over time and somehow ultimately allow us into the exotic mission. This is where we get into slightly more spoiler territory, so if you don't want to know any potential info about what this exotic mission could be later in the season, then I would just skip out of the video right here. But there's a visible trait in the collections called Fanatical Lance, and we can see rapid final blows cause targets to explode in a pool of radiolarian fluid, and hip firing will launch multiple projectiles at once in a slower moving spread pattern, and projectiles detonate on impact. So that's a new trait, obviously linked to the episode content, but we can almost certainly connect it to these refit catalysts that we can spot in the collections as well. And there's a destabilizing rounds refit, as well as an onslaught and subsistence refit for what appears to be an auto rifle. Plus, there are various frames, so we're looking at another craftable exotic, which will come from this pursuit at some point in the season. So that's an additional layer to look forward to. Exactly when we'll get it isn't clear yet. We've had loads of new content in the past week, so it's entirely possible we'll have to wait a little while for this, but it will almost certainly be dropping as part of Echoes at some point in the near future. So looking forward to finding out more about that, and let us know what you think about it down below. For today though guys, that's what we have to speak about for this video, a whole bunch of updates from Bungie, and a quick look at some of the content from this week. But as always, share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section. If you've enjoyed this one, a rating below really does help us out on the channel. And also be sure to get subscribed so I can keep you posted with more Destiny stuff. But otherwise, cheers for tuning in, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.